I'm Jeannette Ross. I started playing Frisbee in Richmond, Virginia at Monroe Park. The first time I ever threw one. I was never very athletic. And there was some hippies out throwing the Frisbee, and it landed on the blanket, or near the blanket where I was sitting, and they did me the, get a little help here gesture. And I got up, I'd been watching them, and I tossed it right straight to them, and I was like, wow, I think I can do this. And so then my boyfriend at the time, we would toss it back and forth. And after that, we got married and moved to some condominiums where we played. It was all young people. We played in the central courtyard there, and all the men always wanted to throw to me because they knew I could throw it back hard to them and right to them, which was pretty cool for me, being a 98-pound weakling all before that in my life. And so then when Michael and I re-met, actually Michael and I knew each other when we were 15, went to the same high school, and we re-met and both realized we were each playing Frisbee, and he had already started freestyling with his brother, who kind of gave it up with him, and so I took his brother's place, and we learned to nail delay out in the street of the condominiums where I lived, and I chased it all around for a long time until I got it. And then I guess we
actually, we're the original ran off and joined the circus. We're the Bronco Billies. We went to our first national tournament, and Tom Monroe saw us perform, and we didn't really even make the finals, but Tom Monroe was putting together some male-female teams, and I think he saw something in our showmanship, not necessarily in our technical skills. And we signed contracts after being at our first national, and we had been at the point where both of us had been in the workaday world. I'd been with the government for 12 years, and Jeannette had been in the insurance industry in Washington, and we actually had the opportunity to run off and join the circus, and that's what we did. I think on our first tour, we traveled 80,000 miles in 10 different states, did 3 shows a day, 5 days a week, actually put on our taxes professional Frisbee player. That, after working in a warehouse in the government for 10 years, that was the circus. And actually that was my first attraction to what you could do with a Frisbee, was going to the Ringling Brothers Circus and seeing a performer go around the audience, MTAing a Frisbee all around the audience, all the way around. And I thought, wow, that's just amazing. And it was several years later, but we were doing the same thing. We used to throw out over the audience in gymnasiums to each other at the end of the court, and the kids loved it. It just went right over their head up to the top of the stadium. And it was, for people who had, been part of the teaming infrastructure of the city, to be out like that, to be in gymnasiums with kids all day long, and it was just a real dream come true. And we settled in a small town in Southern Virginia, and kind of took our sport. I think now that we've been in it this long and we're moving towards retirement, I want to see the sport. I lament it losing popularity as a pastime, and I think approaching the schools is the place to attack that, and that's what I'm about, working with schools, health departments, and municipalities to sell the whole package of disc sports. I think it's good for people's health, mentally and physically.
We played with the Washington Area Frisbee Club.
Yeah, started out there.
We competed in some tournaments in Washington, D.C. Usually we were, seeded first, I guess, small-time players.
Yeah.
And we went to Atlanta, was our first tournament. Scott Zimmerman, I think that was the year he won the World Championship. So that was kind of cool. We were in on that. We met Jens and Erwin Velasquez that summer. That was 1979. We went to Boulder, we went to
Minneapolis.
We went to Rochester. We played with some people down in Florida who had an object course around the circus people.
Yeah,
The name escapes me right
played
now.
golf in West Virginia with Johnny Siaz, who went on to be in
That's
the
right.
Disc Golf Hall of Fame, and was played on a mountain course for the first time, and it was just up and down steep grades, an object course through the mountains of West Virginia. Just, we played saucer golf in Minnesota. It was just when the sport was in its infancy. It was just burgeoning here and there, like mushrooms. It was popping up. We just took it all in.
And then we started playing disc golf at some point. Mostly we had freestyled up to that point. We played disc golf at Powhatan Bay, and we were on that TV show. What was that TV show called?
PM Magazine. Yeah.
PM Magazine.
Yeah.
Because disc golf was pretty new, particularly in the Northern Virginia area. I got an invitation to something. I always
World
forget what it was.
Championship
That was
year,
disc golf. I didn't go, but I played pretty well that year. But still at that time, there weren't a whole lot of women playing disc golf.
And what we've done more than anything else is spread the jam. That's what the Jens and the group call it, in terms of we're about passing it on. My favorite passing it on story is we left the '78 Maryland State Tournament. I encountered a 15-year-old kid on the beach. Spent 15, 20 minutes with him, and 38 years later, his wife was putting together his bucket list summer, and we had given him a mini, one of our minis that we just had fresh, and his wife called, and they wanted to come and visit the museum, Flight Fantastic Frisbee Museum, to start out his bucket list summer, and it was 38 years later it came to visit
And we
us.
didn't even remember that
Yeah,
encounter. It was just so ordinary at the time. But
it stuck.
he sure remembered it.
Yeah.
It was a gratifying day. Took him out on the ball field and taught him how to behind the back catches, some simple little things. Yeah, that was fun.
Now the town that we brought Frisbee to in maybe 81, 82 or something like that has 3 disc golf courses, 2 of which we were in on the design team of, and we feel like we've planted something that will go on, that does good. That's one of the places I see disc sports is in stress relief and anxiety relief. We see a lot of potential there. I'm working with a number of support service groups in using what I call aero sports, and that incorporates kites, even paper airplanes, so that I have a program for a rainy day, and it teaches aerodynamics. In fact, the aero sports program teaches 13 aerodynamic principles. So I feel like it fits in schools that have a scientific bend, a technological bend, all of those areas that you can slip disc sports into education. And now that it has the IOC nod, I think that people should be looking at that. We should be building towards that. Well, people like us anyway, that we have the time and resources, that we're not worried about our performance or our rating. What we're worried about is forwarding the sport. I try to make the disc fit the person. I don't put kids out with golf discs. Or if I have a group of youngsters that are playing golf, I start them out with Sonics, because they're tactile and they're not as heavy and hard to manage as a golf disc. So they find that more palatable. That's easier for them. And if it's really young kids, I use the 110 fastback, because again, they're very stable and they can throw them nice and flat, rather than trying to rush them. That's like if I have kids freestyling, I don't start them with a 165 or a sky styler. I start them with something they can throw, something they can manage, and then once they learn their throw, adjust it, teach them different things. One thing I tell people as an instruction is to keep their chest up toward that'll keep them from bending over and throwing a hook. You know, if they change the angle of their wrist rather than change the angle of their whole arm. If you just lean back a little bit, that changes the angle of their wrist.
And I think it helps to explain to people that balls have to be propelled and discs actually develop a flight pattern, and that they are 1/3 wing, 1/3 parachute, and 1/3 gyroscope. And so that gives a little scientific flair to the disc, and it's more than just a toy. It's rather involved, and that however you release the disc, that's how it's going to fly. If you release it in this outward motion, it takes this outward curve. If you release it with an inward motion, it takes that inward curve. And if you fly it straight ahead, it goes straight ahead.
You know, I think it's applicable to a school system for 3 reasons. The accessibility, because anybody can own a flying disc. It doesn't have to be a competition disc. It can be something they gave to them, you know. The accessibility, the safety. When you talk about big numbers and organized sports, nothing gets safer than ultimate. Then the golf is like a walk in the woods with a purpose. So, you know, you've got accessibility, safety, and economics. Nothing is cheaper than a Frisbee. I mean, you know, people give them away. So I think those 3 things make it a perfect sport for the future.
I have one thing to add, and I think I would be remiss without mentioning how accessible a sport it is for females. Many of them are as good as the men or better, and it's a really good thing for women to do. And I feel like I've kind of been a pioneer in that, of demonstrating that women, even small women like me, can play Frisbee.
Worst thing that ever happened to us when we did shows is we would show up at some place, we'd be carrying our equipment in, and somebody would look at Jeannette and say, "Oh, do you play too?" She's half the team. You know, she's my partner. "Oh, do you play too?" It embarrassed me. You know, I felt like I had to apologize to Jeannette when we were sorry about that. You know.
But we got somewhere.
Yeah.